Hey, it's real easy to be locked in and bring the juice week one when it's the first time we get college football in a long time and your team has a big matchup. But who are you when your favorite team is playing an FCS directional school? What kind of fan are you when you don't have the big logo on the matchup? I think a lot of y'all that are tuned into this show, you're diehard, so you're probably locked in anyways. But just a little word of caution for your friends that are maybe on the fringe when it comes to dialing in for week 2 of the college football season. All right, we're locked in. We got a great show lined up. It is Thursday, September 5th, 2024, the last one on the face of the planet, the last live show of the week. We're going to sprint through the line. If you're new to this show, this is the Hard Count, the People's College Football Show. College football, nothing but college football. You say, oh, you must just be doing this show because the season's starting back up. No. Like we've been doing this show. We're walking through what March was. We're doing this show during spring football. We're doing this show during the portal. This show is college football, nothing but college football. No additives, no preservatives, no hot takes. Just quite frankly, college football the way that you want it discussed. Because we're college football fans, you're college football fans, and that's pretty much the way that we break this whole thing down. So on today's show, you've already heard from me. You already heard my predictions and my takes on what week 2 is going to look like from where I'm standing. Went to Twitter, or X, whatever they're calling it right now, at JD Pickell. I posted the question, all right, week 2 is here. Give me your predictions for what's about to go down here in week 2. And we got about 3 or 4 of them to walk through. We got a take on Nebraska and Colorado. We got a prediction on Texas and Michigan. We got a couple of y'all calling your shots when it comes to the spread in Oregon and Boise State and Auburn and Cal. So we'll break those down together. We also have a massive addition here at On 3, Ari Wasserman, the latest 5-star pickup for us here at On 3. He's going to join the show in give or take 30 to 35 minutes. We'll talk some ball with him, get his thoughts on what week 1 was before we move into what week 2 is going to be, get his predictions. That'll be a real good time. Excited for that. Also, upset watch. Not calling our shot for the upset necessarily. If we had a take on an upset, we would tell you. All right? With that being said, who should maybe keep their eyes peeled a little bit for a more exciting game than they bargained for? We'll talk about that as well. And then, as always, as we do every single Thursday during the beautiful thing that is the college football season, we'll have our final thoughts for you at the end of this show, kind of our final takes before we jump into the beautiful thing that is the week 2 slate. If you're following me on the socials, then you have been tuned in, especially on Instagram. You've been tuned into what we do from a sports betting perspective during college football season. We got a segment that just lives on my Instagram. It's called Against the Suits, the same acronym of ATS, Against the Spread, that kind of play on words there. Last week now, we went 4-1. All right, that's kind of where we're starting at for week 1. Now, full transparency, if I'm you, I would consider fading my picks because, again, it's week 1, and sometimes feeling like you know something means you don't know anything. But even with that being said, started out pretty hot. Right, so we're 4-1. If you want to be dialed in and tail us or fade us on what we're betting this upcoming Saturday, Against the Suits, probably Thursday, Friday-ish, before the college football games start, obviously, on Instagram, at JD Pickell. Follow me there. But most importantly, make sure you're subscribed right here, because this is where all of our content lives for the most part. This is where we get to interact together, have the live show, have the one-off clips. Everything involving this show, the Hard Count, everything involving the beautiful sport that you and I both love, college football, happens right here on this platform. So make sure you're subscribed. All right, let's jump right in here, man. Let's talk about the upsets that are maybe on the horizon here for week 2. Full transparency. I do not see a ton of major upsets happening this week. Famous last words. But even with that being said, what are maybe the fins we're seeing sticking out of the water? Could be a dolphin, could be nothing, but it also could be a shark, so I would maybe tread lightly. The spread in Arkansas at Oklahoma State is not one that you would necessarily say, wow, massive upset if Arkansas were to beat Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's favored by 7.5. Even though the spread isn't massive, I still think if Arkansas were to win this game, man, it's hard to not call that an upset because Oklahoma State at the Crib, which is one of the toughest places to play in college football, not the most massive stadium in Stillwater, but still ton of just noise in the way that thing is structured, like the crowd is on top of you. Arkansas, I think, is extra dangerous in this spot. Got a mobile quarterback in Taylor Green, transferring over from Boise State. He's all of like 6'6" and runs like a deer. Arkansas hung 70 points in their season opener. 10 drives, 10 touchdowns. That is ridiculous, all right? Anytime you have a mobile quarterback and you pair that with a team that, quite frankly, now going into this season under Sam Pittman, there were a lot of folks wondering if Sam Pittman would even be the head coach at Arkansas at this point. I think they have a little bit of a YOLO mentality. That's dangerous. Now, I like Oklahoma State right now. We have a board behind the camera here that I'm looking into, and it's got all our picks in the office. We go team by team. I have not yet filled out my pick for Arkansas and Oklahoma State. Very tempted to go Arkansas there. I wouldn't touch that spread if I'm y'all. If anything, I would lean Arkansas plus 7.5. Oklahoma State's a salty team, top 5 in returning production in all of college football. Mike Gundy's teams play well at home. I'm just saying, keep an eye on that one, because that one could get very, very intriguing and shake up our perspective on what we think Oklahoma State is this upcoming season. Now, this is the game that I'm circling. This is the game that I would actually take App State with the 17 points. They go to Clemson. And, y'all, this one to me just screams from the mountaintops. Keep an eye on this one. I don't know if App State pulls out the upset outright, but plus 17 feels like free money to me. This will be on Against the Suits, the betting segment we do on my Instagram page, at JD Piquel. Clemson looked great in the first half against Georgia. All right, they showed a really strong front seven. My question was, that's kind of a youthful outfit over there in the defensive interior. Will they be able to sustain against Georgia? They did it in the second half, but in the first half, I think they put their best foot forward and showed, okay, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the ACC. App State, though, man, it would be very App State-ish of them to make this brutal for Clemson, because you look back over the course of App State's recent Power 5 opponents that they've had to play, Power 4, I guess. Took North Carolina to double overtime last year. They beat Texas A&M the year before. I don't think you want to see App State come into your place right after playing a physical Georgia outfit. You're kind of licking your wounds. You're trying to get back on track, trying to get a win. If Clemson does not bring their best football that day, more specifically, if Clemson does not bring some offensive firepower to the table, this one will be very interesting. You'll be flipping through the channels, and you'll have a game check-in from whatever game you were watching. And it'll be Matt Berry saying, hey, we got action out there in Death Valley, App State, making it a tough one for Dabo and company. It'll be something like that. It'll be very interesting, and that's the one, again, if I were picking an upset right now, I like App State plus 17, and I'm not so sure that won't be one they win outright. I'm not calling it right now, but plus 17 is where I'd fall and feel pretty good about doing that. Now, there's an interesting matchup early in the SEC. You got South Carolina at Kentucky. Kentucky favored by 10.5. We've already predicted this game. We picked Kentucky to win that game, which isn't saying a whole lot given their double-digit point favorites. But Shane Beamer now, the last 2 years against Mark Stoops, 2-0. There's a bit of a personal element to this game between Stoops and Beamer, with how Mark Stoops said in not so many words how he's not a big fan of certain coaches having to dance around and put their sunglasses on and whatnot, essentially throwing shade at Shane Beamer and what he's done with the South Carolina creative team, which we personally feel like is nothing but greatness on college football Twitter. It is what it is. Dylan Stewart, true freshman edge for South Carolina, won Defensive Lineman of the Week in the SEC. If you go through and, just search his name on Twitter. Just search Dylan Stewart, South Carolina on Twitter. Watch the clips that pop up. He's an absolute problem off the edge. If he gets going a little bit, maybe he wreaks havoc, gets a little strip sack action. Lenore Sellers has the ground game going with Rocket Sanders. They stay on schedule. That could be a recipe now where South Carolina makes it 3-0 the last 3 years against Kentucky. Also worth noting, Kentucky did not play 4 quarters last week. And that's not me saying it in a metaphorical sense of like, oh, they got to put 4 good quarters together of football. Like, literally, Kentucky had their game called early last week against Southern Miss. South Carolina probably was a lot more, not probably, it definitely was a lot more dramatic against Old Dominion than you would like it to be if you're a Gamecock fan. You wonder if you're Kentucky and you're watching that film, you say, oh, we're going to roll these guys. I don't know. Keep an eye on that one. That one could very much so get intriguing. We'll talk more about Boise State and Oregon in a little bit here. That's going to be one that a lot of folks tell you, oh, hey, keep an eye on Boise State now because Oregon, they played real close with Idaho. Again, we'll talk about that game in a little more depth here in a little bit. To put it simply, do not buy that. This is a very angry, salty Oregon team. Do not buy the fact that people are telling you, oh, hey, is that an upset? It's not, okay? It's not. We'll leave it at that. So, couple of games rather to keep an eye on when it comes to some upset potential. Again, if I had to pick one, and I'm not calling the upset, but if I had to pick one that I like the spread for the best, it'd be App State plus 17 against Clemson. No shade to Clemson, just how we feel about App State. Again, they're the team that we have in the college football playoff from the G5 as we sit here in week 2. Appreciate everybody tuned in live. Go ahead and make sure you are subscribed to the On3 YouTube channel. One thing I want to let y'all know is that the Hard Count is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. Now, if you're subscribed to the channel already, I've already thrown out a few PrizePicks plays for you. We had some PrizePicks plays last week. If you don't know what I'm talking about, PrizePicks, daily fantasy, made easy, super comprehensive, super easy to withdraw your winnings, super easy to play. All you got to do is pick 2 or more player projections from their board they have. We play exclusively college football on this show, so you're free to tell us there. You pick more or less on those projections, bada bing, bada boom, you're off and running to the races. Now, if you use code HARDCOUNT at prizepicks.com and you use a $5 lineup, you get $50 in promo funds just for playing. You don't have to win your lineup, though we hope you do, but just for playing with a $5 lineup using code HARDCOUNT, $50 in promo funds. It's a real good time. If you are playing during the month of September, and I encourage you to do so, there is a free Caleb Williams square, essentially, half a passing yard, all of September. Go ahead and pair that with whatever college football squares you want, and you'll be in good shape. So, again, PrizePicks, code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups, $50 in promo funds. Pretty good way to live. So we appreciate PrizePicks. Again, helping us squeeze the juice out of college football season. And we got a PrizePicks play for you a little bit later in the show as well. So stay tuned for that. So I put this call to action out on my Twitter page, at Jody Pickell, and I said, okay, you've heard my predictions. You've heard my takes. I've given you my winners, my losers. I've given you what we think is going to happen in terms of the spread for some of these big matchups. What's y'all's predictions? Because this is, of course, the People's College Football Show. We can't be the People's College Football Show and not involve the people. Doesn't make sense. So I asked y'all what your predictions are. You answered in full force, as you always do. We appreciate you for that. Dingo got the party started. He says he thinks Texas beats Michigan handedly. The spread is Texas, give or take a touchdown. He thinks it sounds like they make it a little bit more definitive than that. If we're talking about Texas decisively beating Michigan, that to me would look somewhere in the range of 2 touchdowns, which again would be impressive given the fact that Michigan won the whole darn thing last year. We pick Texas. We do not think they win the game by 14 points. But if that were to happen, what would that mean? What would that look like? I think what it would essentially say about Texas is everything hypothetically we've been saying about Texas over the course of this offseason tangibly is seen in this game. Because a Texas win, to me, would look something like, okay, well, Texas on the perimeter has some skill players to make it really tough on Michigan, and Michigan's secondary is really good, but maybe, just maybe, Texas wins enough of those matchups outside. Quinn Ewers has a good enough day to where they win the football game. That wouldn't be surprising. But if they win it definitively, that to me means that Texas in the trenches was able to have their way against Michigan. And that's saying something about Michigan now too. Because Michigan, I think, in the interior of the defensive line might be the best in America. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, 2 of the best defensive linemen in all of college football. That's going to be a salty outfit. So if Texas can run the football, that will, I think, lead to them being able to throw the football effectively, even more so than I think they already will be able to. That would say a lot about Texas. Maybe more importantly, if you're able to stop the run against Michigan, what does that say about Texas and their chops on their defensive line? Because all the things we talked about this offseason were Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, they're gone to the league. There were 2 All-Americans. How do they respond? They were so good against the run. Michigan is dependent on running the football to win this game, to score points. And that's not me speaking down on Davis Warren. That's just the identity of who this team is. They are going to pound the rock for 4 quarters, and their bet is in the 3rd and 4th quarter, we will be more big dog than you, and you will break, and we will win the game. And quite frankly, we've seen them do that many a time, has Michigan. But if Texas is able to stop the run and handle Michigan up front, how do we look at them when it comes to the rest of their path to potentially playing for a national championship? Tell you one thing, I feel a lot better from a Texas fan when Georgia comes to town October 19th. I feel a lot better about what we have in the trenches because, again, all these things we're talking about with Texas competing for a national title, a lot of it has to do with Quinn Ewers. But to get over that hump and to actually hoist that kind of hardware, you have to have what is required in the interior of your offensive and defensive line. Now, offensively, you bring back 4 of 5 starters from a year ago, so I think you feel pretty good in that department. But on the defensive line, like again, you're asking some guys to step up that are a little bit of maybe not new characters, but in different roles. Like Alfred Collins is a guy that you have to have in this game, defensive tackle for Texas. If you're able to do that and control the line of scrimmage against Michigan, that is tangible evidence that, hey, okay, Texas has what it takes to go toe-to-toe with the big boys of college football in the trenches. And we kind of saw a little bit of this last year against Alabama. Look at the box score. The rushing numbers were about even. But we were at that game. We were on the field when Texas was driving with the football. And quite frankly, they could have scored again on Alabama. They could have made that a little bit more of a ugly win over Alabama in terms of that final score. Decided to kneel it out. But like they were moving the football on the ground against an SEC Nick Saban coach team. Now, Alabama got better since that game, but what I think is important to note here is if Texas is able to have the success that our guy believes that they eventually could have in this game against Michigan, that would say a lot about their potential for this year, of course. But I think when you zoom out a little bit further, it says a lot about Steve Sarkisian and the way that he's been able to replenish and build this roster to be ready for the SEC, to be ready to compete at the Tier 1 level when it comes to aspiring to win a national championship and so on and so forth. Like, that would, I think, say a lot about Steve Sarkisian as a builder. Because right now it's a lot about how he's a great play caller and a great quarterback whisperer and recruiter and offensive guru. If they are able to beat Michigan in the trenches, we better sing his praises as to how they've been able to build this roster on the defensive side as well, especially up front. So, again, we have Texas winning that game. If they win by double digits, that would surprise us. But, again, that's what it would require, and that's, I think, what we'd be saying about Texas if they were to have that kind of showing in the trenches to win that game in a decisive fashion. Man, so this is not a prediction that y'all have, but I just want to touch on this really quick. It's not a full segment, but I just want us to give our thoughts here. DJ Lagway, 5-star quarterback, true freshman quarterback for Florida, will be starting this week against Samford. Graham Mertz has a concussion. He's out. Brutal if you're Florida that your starting quarterback, who you had a lot of your hopes built on for 2024, is going to miss some time, at least one game. If you're DJ Lagway, if you're Florida, what you need from him in this game, I think what you need from Florida in this game maybe is a better way to say it, you need more support around him. Because DJ Lagway, what you require him is make good decisions, go to the right place with the football. Let's call a spade here. Like, Samford should not be able to hold a candle to Florida offensively and just overall as a roster. DJ Lagway needs to have the proper help from a Trey Wilson, from an Elijah Badger, from an Andy Jean, and also from the defense. Like, the last thing you want for DJ Lagway in this spot is for Florida to kind of sputter out of the gates. Defense has a breakdown. The heart rate increases for everyone on that team, and you're like, oh, boy, like, why is this a game right now? Just make it simple for him. Make it easy for him. Skill players help him out. Let's go have a good time and beat Samford. If I'm Florida, that's what I'm saying. So we'll track that, obviously, but something to monitor here as DJ Lagway is going to make his first start as a Florida Gator. A little bit earlier than expected, but regardless, excited to see how he fares in his first start. Now, Steve got at us, and his prediction for week 2, it's a big one now. Steve threw down the gauntlet. He says that Nebraska makes a statement and dominates Colorado. 40-10 is the final score that Steve is calling here. Now, we have Nebraska winning this game, but I will say this. I think a Nebraska definitive win and a Colorado definitive win are both in the bag of possibilities that you could pick out here when it comes to how this game could play out. Like, for Colorado, that's absolutely on the table. Based on what happened last year in Boulder, like, Colorado, I mean, Nebraska ran for over 200 yards, and it didn't matter. Like Colorado just absolutely boat raced them last year. The way this game feels to me, we've already given you our pick in this one, but the way that it feels to me, it has a very, like, arm wrestle vibe to it. Like, think about it this way. When you and your buddy arm wrestle, and you're maybe of a similar strength to some respects, you have your strengths, he has his strengths, but, like, whoever gets the jump on the other, whoever is able to, like, gain that leverage first, whether it was a quickness thing or whether it was a early strength thing, whatever it ended up being, whoever's able to get that leverage usually just kind of holds it. And it may not be a thing where either one eventually takes the other down to a definitive, decisive victory, but, like, you're just hanging out for 4.5 minutes, just like your buddy's got you at a 45-degree angle, trying to just push and push and push. Like, that could be the situation in this game. Whoever gets leverage first, whether it be Colorado getting out to a 10-point lead or Nebraska getting to a 10-point lead, I don't think you want to chase Colorado, and I don't think you want to have to play against Colorado or play against Nebraska's rushing attack if they've got a 10-point advantage and leverage on you. So we'll see what happens there. But given Steve's prediction, we're going to unpack this together. If it happens this way, we'll start with Nebraska scoring 40. The thing that I'm thinking about is, okay, what is Dylan Raiola's stat line if they score 40? Because I have to believe, as good as I think Nebraska is going to be running the football in this game, if you score 40, he probably had a big day through the air. And there's no other way around it. Like, Nebraska, in that sense, I think, would have played really complimentary football, probably ran the ball effectively, but then once Colorado started trying to stack the box and commit resources at that point, and then Dylan Raiola is probably going over the top, got Isaiah Nayor, got Jamal Banks, got somebody pushing the ball deep for him to go and make some big plays and make Colorado pay. If that's the case, like, it's going to be very, very good vibes in Lincoln, and there's going to be a lot of good feelings around what Dylan Raiola is. To put it more, maybe a more specific point on this for Nebraska going forward, if Dylan Raiola is able to have a stat line where Nebraska scores 40 points, think about just the overall, like, poise and swag and intangibles and just it factor you have to have in this spot. Because that's one of my questions going into this game is like, hey, as talented as Dylan Raiola is, true freshman, it's his second start. It's prime time. It's going to be, I believe, I've said this many times, I believe this is the most watched game of this entire weekend. And you got Texas and Michigan playing each other, two of the most massive brands in the sport, with Coach Prime and with Nebraska having the rabid fan base they do. Like, this is going to be, I believe, again, like the show of all shows in this one. So if he ends up showing out in this kind of a spot, think about just like the ice water it takes in his veins to be able to contribute and to be able to deliver in a moment like this. That would say a lot. Now, if you hold Colorado to 10, it probably means that you were able to have a great showing against the run, which we expect Nebraska to do. Not to say anything of, Colorado's run game, but Dallin Hayden had 20 rush yards last week, and he was the leading rusher. So got to improve a little bit there if you're Colorado. We like Nebraska in the run defense. It also probably means you got after Shedeur Sanders pretty well. We still have some reservations around that offensive line for Colorado. I know they only got sacked one time against North Dakota State, but still, man, like, there was a few too many times I'm watching Shedeur Sanders pick himself up off the ground, takes a shot to the chin, and credit to him, man. He stood in there and he took shot after shot and kept getting up. But, like, I think if they hold him to 10 points, they're probably got after Shedeur Sanders at a pretty effective rate. But even with that being said, as much as you can get after Shedeur Sanders, as much as you are maybe playing against the run at an effective clip, I don't know how this would happen unless your secondary just has an electric showing. Because it's not just that they got Travis Hunter, it's that they got Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn and just a myriad of other weapons. And they're going to throw the football against Nebraska. That is going to be a point. I said it in our prediction video. I don't know how you slow down Colorado's passing attack. Even in our game prediction, I don't think Nebraska does slow down Colorado's passing attack. But if they do, and again, if they hold them 10 points, that would, I think, have to be the case. What a progress point for Nebraska. Because last year in this game, Shedeur Sanders went for 396 yards. Colorado scored 36 points. Think about the pep in your step and the confidence that builds for you if you're Nebraska in the secondary going into games against Ohio State with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka on that side of the football for the Buckeyes. And USC, Miller Moss threw for darn near 400 yards. Think about what that would say about Nebraska and their secondary in terms of the progress point and the way they have improved since Matt Rule's gotten there. Now, statistically, Nebraska was really good defensively last year. So don't hear me trying to tell you that this is some massive quantum leap for Nebraska to defend the pass well. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think, based on last year and based on who they have left to play on the schedule from a quarterback wide receiver perspective, this would be a nice little progress point for the folks out there in Lincoln. Now, zooming out further, the measurable progress of what Matt Rule has done in Lincoln, if you're going to go out there and have a definitive 30-point victory over Colorado, which, again, 30 points is a lot. I mean, if you win the game by double digits, consider that definitive. That would, again, be another progress point, another measuring stick for, hey, this is what Nebraska is. This is what Nebraska is under Matt Rule. And I think if you're a Nebraska fan, like, think about the validation. Think about the amount of times you've told your friends from other fan bases, like, hey, if we just get a quarterback, hey, we just get the right head coach, hey, if we just do this, just do that, we're going to have a chance to win at a high level, going to have a chance to beat these teams that we should beat by a fair margin. Nebraska's favored by over a touchdown in this game. I think it's at 7.5 last I checked. Vegas believes Nebraska should win this football game. Now, why haven't they been able to do it in the past couple of seasons? I mean, turnovers, not able to close out games, not having that killer instinct. In this game, especially if they have this kind of result, but just overall period, if they can win the game definitively, you feel like, okay, we're not crazy. We're not crazy for believing that this team could accomplish something like this. So we're going to see what both these teams are even past this game. I don't want to just crown Nebraska if they get a big win over Colorado, and you don't want to crown Colorado if they get a big win over Nebraska. But even with that being said, again, the measuring stick, the watermark this would be for Nebraska if they get a definitive win over Colorado based on what happened last year, that'd be huge. That'd be absolutely huge, and it would be a huge point to talk about if you're a Nebraska fan as to how far you've come since Matt Rule's taken over there. Now, Jeremiah hit us up, and he said that Oregon is about to cover this spread against Boise State easily. Spread's at 19.5. We talked about it during our Upset Watch segment. There is a reason why we did not have Oregon and Boise State on there. This is a massive, massive fool's gold upset alert. Notice I said fool's gold, meaning it's not really an upset alert. Maybe we phrased that poorly. I don't know. Boise State scored 56 last week. And the headline is, man, Ashton Genty had 260-some-odd yards on the ground. He had 6 touchdowns. Like, he's a Heisman candidate. Okay, that's 100% true. Then you pair that with, well, Oregon, they only scored 24 against Idaho. Idaho's an FCS team. Like, are we really taking Oregon seriously? We sure about that? We sure Oregon's that team that we thought they were preseason? I see folks saying Oregon's fraudulent. I'm like, okay, that's your prerogative. I think it's also important to note now, as much as you want to talk about Boise State's offense and what they did effectively, because scoring over 50 points, I don't care who it's against. Like, that's impressive. However, Boise State also allowed 45 points to Georgia Southern. 322 pass yards allowed 4 yards a carry to over 100 yards. If Georgia Southern is scoring 45, not to knock Georgia Southern, but how many points is Oregon about to score? I think that's worth asking. Now, when it comes to Boise State offensively, because that's probably the talking point that you're riding with if you are calling this an upset. If you're calling Boise State to go get it done, you're saying, well, hey, Boise State, the way they ran the football last week, man, it was domination. You go back and watch that game, Boise State bullied Georgia Southern up front. Like, you watch the broadcast, you just watch the offensive line. They were pushing Georgia Southern like 3 to 4 yards off the ball. It was a teach tape kind of moment if you love offensive line play. However, in a situation like that, the matchup for Boise State favors them massively against Georgia Southern. Like, the offensive line that they have against Georgia Southern's defensive line, it is a matchup differential that favors the Broncos by a mile. You're not going to have a matchup favored for you against Oregon. And that's not me being down on Boise State. Those are just the facts. Like, you went from playing, let's call it 3-star caliber players at Georgia Southern to now 4 or 5-star caliber players against Oregon. The line of scrimmage is going to be a very, very different caliber than Boise State played against last week. So I'm not telling you they couldn't have success on the ground, but I'd be wildly surprised if they were anything close to what they did last week. Also, the tackling, like Oregon, I promise you, they will be dialed in. They will not miss tackles. They will not be poor in space the way that I believe Georgia Southern was against Boise State. So that's all, like, the talking points, the stuff you talk about on paper. Hey, Oregon has better players. No duh. Like, that's not really a novel analysis there for you. But the reason why I'm actually riding with Jeremiah here and why I would take Oregon to cover, I don't know if it'll be a best bet for us on against the Suits, but I'm tempted to. The reason why I like Oregon outside of the talent gap is, like, if you're Boise State, seeing Oregon struggle with Idaho in that box score is the last thing you want to see. Why? Because Dan Lanning, all week long now, has had the undivided attention of his football team. Why? Because he's got ammunition. I don't know this to be true, but just having played the sport and taking a wild guess at what I believe to be true about Dan Lanning and the way that he operates, I don't think those post-Idaho meetings were all that fun. I don't think sitting through film and seeing Idaho run a trick play on you and seeing guys undisciplined was all that enjoyable. Have to believe that Dan Lanning communicated as much in whatever fashion he does. Oregon's locked in for this one. Why do more talented teams lose games? Not focused, not taking it seriously. Maybe they don't have a great game plan in place. None of those things are going to be true about Oregon in this spot, okay? So I think that Dylan Gabriel has a massive day. I think that the Oregon defensive line shows up in a big way. I think they play their brand of football, and I think you see Oregon's best football this upcoming game against Boise State. So 19.5, that's a big number. Again, I'm tempted to put it on our best bets, but overall, I think Oregon wins, and they leave zero doubt about what they're going to be in 2024. Don't buy the fool's gold now. Do not buy it looks real. There's all these talking points. Well, they struggle with FCS, this, that, and the other. Boise State's better than Idaho. True, 100% true. But I promise you this, too. Oregon's a lot better than Georgia Southern, who hung 45 on them. No disrespect to the Broncos, man. It's just calling it how we see it. One more prediction from y'all. We got Ari Wasserman here joining us in a matter of a few minutes. James, hit us with an Auburn take, and he's also talking a little bit of coverage here. He thinks Auburn covers the 13.5 against Cal easily. Now, last year, this game was gross. Okay, they went to Cal Berkeley, did Auburn, and it was a 14-10 game. Not necessarily the most visually aesthetic game that you've ever seen. Now, last week, Auburn's offense looked much improved from that showing they had in that game. They thwacked Alabama A&M 73-3. This is going to be an interesting litmus test for us when we talk about Auburn, because Cal actually returned 73% production from that squad that they played against last year, or the squad that played Auburn last year in Berkeley. Interesting little footnote here. This is just the wild world that college football is right now with the transfer portal. Sam Jackson, in this game a season ago, was the quarterback for Cal, was the leading passer in this game. Now he will be on Auburn's sideline as a wide receiver. Gotta love college football. Absolutely have to love college football. So here's the deal. If Auburn beats Cal, which is a funny statement to say, Auburn covering that 13.5, it would not be hey, good for Auburn, man. They have arrived. Look at Auburn. I mean, they are just book your Atlanta tickets right now. Auburn, they're a college football playoff team. Nobody would be saying that. But I think with all that Cal returns from last year's team, from a team that played Auburn to a 14-10 game, in a game where Peyton Thorne threw for 94 yards, if Auburn covers by the number of points that they scored last year, I think if you're an Auburn fan, it would be not so much a we've arrived, but I think it would be a point where you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, okay, we're doing it. It's kind of that moment whenever you're learning how to ride a bike and you've fallen a few times and you're trying to figure it out, and then eventually after a couple of tries, you start to pedal and you start to get some momentum and you're up on yourself and you're balancing and you're like, hey, we're doing it. You're not a pro yet. You're not, signing up for the X Games just yet, but you're looking at yourself saying, okay, hey, we're doing this. There's real progress here. I think that's what Auburn would say if they win this game against Cal and cover that kind of spread. Now, I do think this too. I think Auburn's probably going to cover this spread personally. I think the number of weapons that Auburn has too compared to last year, like Rivaldo Fairweather is phenomenal. I think he's an NFL player. I think he's a massive force for Auburn in this game as well. But if he's your leading receiver on the year, probably not the most effective way to go about offensive football. Now you got Keandre Lambert-Smith, who looked great against Alabama A&M. Alabama A&M, but still good to see an 11-on-11. Cam Coleman, he is a freak show true freshman. Expect him to have a big game in this game. You just go down the line here, Auburn, overall from a roster perspective, is better. If they go ahead and cover that 14 against Cal, you look at Peyton Thorne and say, you threw for 94 yards in this game last year. I'm expecting him to have a better stat line in this game, in this situation. Just speaks volumes to the trend of Auburn and the progress of Auburn, which really what we've said for a long time is what this year is all about. Just give me progress. Give me marketable moments that show me where Auburn is headed. And the game against Cal, it's not where you plant your flag and say, hey, come to Auburn because we beat Cal. No, you don't say that, but you do look at yourself and say, this was a game that we struggled in last year. Copy and paste to the next season. It was the second game of the Hugh Freeze era a year ago. It's our second game of 2024. In a year's time, look at where we are on the scoreboard. Look at what we did. Beat this team by 4 a year ago. Beat them by 14 the next year. Okay, so again, we're not saying that you book any tickets anywhere or start telling yourself that you're going to win the SEC. But I do think that the progress you can point to in a game like this, in an opponent that brings back a lot of production from last year's team that you quite frankly had a little bit of trouble with, would say a lot and would mean a lot for Auburn going forward here. So I'm with James. I think they cover the 13.5. Is it a best bet for us? Probably not. Right now, we'll see. But I think James is onto something here, and I think it would be a very good sign for the folks out there in Auburn, Alabama. Now, speaking of a good sign, man, whenever we have a guest on, we turn the monitor on. Nick Brake, kind of behind the scenes, goes on and turns on the TV screen so we can see who's on the other side of it. And on the other side of the TV screen right now, we got the man, the myth, the legend, the newest 5-star addition to On 3 from Andy and Ari Wasserman. Ari, what's going on, man? Are we coming through okay for you? Can you hear us?
Yeah, it's perfect. Watched the show many times. Feels really, really good to be on with the best biceps in college football. So I'm ready to ride. And it's been a great first week here. I don't know about the 5-star distinction. I'll take like a developmental 4-star, like somewhere that ranks in like the 300 to 400s. But I think I could, by the end of my career, get a 5-star output. So we're hoping for the best, but we're off to a good start here.
I will say this. I will just toot the horn of the folks in the scouting department for On 3. On 3 is typically earlier on a lot of recruits. Like they'll put them as a 5-star before some other services do. So if you're an On 3 5-star, in my opinion, that's all that matters. Okay, so I don't want to ruffle feathers, but that's all that matters.
Yeah. I think that I am. Hopefully, they brought me here, so I think that they're high on what I can bring, and I'm just now hoping it's my turn to prove them right. So happy to be on here. Happy that you have me on, and I love your show, JD, and it's a pleasure to get to work with you.
Man, well, that means a lot. It's like a Batman and Batman every single morning now with Andy and Ari, man. I'm a big fan of it. And I texted you to jump on the show this morning, and I was like, hey, man, I don't really have this super drawn-out agenda. I just want to talk some football with you and kind of pick your brain on some things. Let's start with week one, man. I think week one is so tricky because it's one data point, and us as emotional college football fans, we just make definitive takes from one game sample size. What is one thing you're pointing to in like – maybe it's an overreaction, maybe it's not, but like one thing you're pointing to and saying, hey, I think it's one data point, but I think this is real about X, Y, and Z team moving into the rest of the season?
I think Miami is the best team in the ACC and is going to make the playoff. I don't know if that's even a hot take at this point, but anybody who has followed me over the years knows that I really don't put much stock into historical things, previous seasons. I don't think that if a team failed for 5 years in a row, that means they can't be successful in the 6th year. And last year when I picked Texas to go to the playoff, I was mocked pretty heavily before the year because, Sark had never won 10 games before in his career. Texas always blows it. They lose games they shouldn't. You know all the Texas, thought processes before going into last year. And my thought process was, look at the roster, look at the lines, look at the skill position players, look at the quarterback. Like they have everything in place to be a very good football team and frankly better than everybody in their conference. And, funny enough, they still did lose to Oklahoma, but they made the playoff and they were a very good football team. And that was a year ago. And coming into this year, I kind of felt the same way about Miami. Now, saying they're going to make the playoff is a lot different this year than it would have been, 12 months ago with the expanded field. But you could say all of the same things about Miami. They never play up to their talent. They, fail in games they shouldn't. They don't take knees. Mario Cristobal's a fraud. Like all the things that you see on Twitter and on message boards all the time exist here. But when you look at what Miami has on its roster, the additions that they've brought in, if Cam Ward, meets or exceeds expectations in that conference with the lines and the skill positions, like there's no reason why they shouldn't run through that conference and win the games that, people don't think they can win. And I put them in my top 10 6 months ago, or not 6, I'm really bad at time, 4 months ago, like after the spring. And people are like, oh my God, what is Miami doing there? And it's like, I really hope, and I don't know if I can work the magic 2 years in a row, but like, I thought that they were going to win the ACC before the year. So to see what they did to Florida, that's a data point. It might be a flawed data point because we don't know exactly what Florida is yet. But like I was buying Miami hype before the year, and I thought that confirmed what I thought was possible.
I'm so glad you made that Texas comp, because that was something we said over here too. We're like, hey, I understand that it wasn't the most, aesthetically pleasing brand of football last year, but still look at the jump from year 1 to year 2 in total offense and total defense. I think we're near, if not in the top 25 in both those categories, before being very distant from those in the first year. And then there was all this talk around, well, he didn't take a knee and all this, and it just like, we call it punchline culture on this show, Ari. Like folks
Sure.
that on Twitter just love to win the moment, love to throw out the clip of the Miami play. I think it was the center just have his hands in his head saying, what are we doing? Like, all that plays well on Twitter, but when it's actually time to play football, like that doesn't matter. And what you said about Cam Ward, I think, is the ultimate differentiating factor. Like, I think now we're actually getting to see what Shannon Dawson's offense is supposed to be, because he has a guy that can pull all the strings. I was blown away. I don't know what you thought about this. I was blown away by how much he seemed like he just did not care at all where they were playing that game. Like, I picked Miami to lose that game because it was in the swamp. And then Cam Ward's heart rate, I said it many times, like, it did not go above whatever his resting heart rate is when Florida was bringing pressure and he's like jogging to borderline walking out of bounds. Like, that was scary stuff to me.
Yeah, and I have a hard time with that, because it's like, on one hand, I thought he was very poised and the stadium was loud. I was there with Andy. But on the other hand, like, Miami's offensive line was awesome. That guy had a lot of time in the backfield to cook, to make his reads, to throw comfortably. It's like, on one hand, I want to give him all the credit in the world, because you do go into that stadium and you play such a good game. Aside from one pick, I don't really know that he made that many mistakes. But on the other hand, how would that have gone if the swamp was loud for 4 quarters and he was getting hit every time he threw the ball? So, like, I think that, like, it's a combination of both, and I think both are good signs, JD. One, you have a quarterback who was calm, cool, collected, and delivered the ball where it needed to be time and time again, made a lot of great throws, scrambles in the instances where he had to. But on the other hand, Mario Cristobal's entire hallmark of being a coach is to shore up the offensive defensive lines. And he did that at Oregon, and now he's done it, or attempted to do it, at Miami through high school football recruiting, and you saw the fruits of that labor paying off in the trenches, which of course takes pressure off of the quarterback and allows him to remain that way. So to me, I look at the game, and I don't know how bad Florida's going to be. I mean, we could look back here in 3 weeks and it just be an absolute dumpster fire, or we could see a team that wins 4 or 5 games in the SEC somehow. We don't know what this single data point means, but you know what the data point means, JD? There's a line in the sand. We came into the weekend thinking that Miami was a relative equal to Florida. Half the people picked Florida, half the people picked Miami. Miami drew a line in that sand and said, we are not them.
Yeah.
So that might mean they're average and Florida's terrible, or might mean that Florida's average and they're great. We don't know the answer to that question yet, but Miami, what a relief if you're a Hurricanes fan to see that line drawn, and now we get to spend the rest of the season getting more context and data points in order to figure out exactly how good they can be.
My thing is, like, I look at the rest of their schedule, I'm like, who's going to beat Miami? Like, if Miami brings their best to the table, which is a discussion every single college football fan base has about their team every weekend, but like, the Florida State game looks a whole heck of a lot more winnable than it did a few weeks ago. I mean, no Clemson on there. At Syracuse could be tricky if Kyle McCord's still dealing the ball around. I mean, Virginia Tech's a weeknight game. I'm like, who's beating Miami is really my thought here.
Coming into the year, we look at that schedule and go, wow, I mean, Miami's got a lot of winnable games, but Virginia Tech and Florida State are going to be really, really tough.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about some data points we got over the weekend. Now, listen, I'm not ready to jump ship on Virginia Tech, okay? Maybe it was a rough opener.
Sure.
Maybe Vanderbilt's – I don't know how to say this without – maybe Vanderbilt's a lot better than we think.
Yeah.
We don't know the answer. Teams jump out of nowhere all the time. What I do know is Miami's better than Florida State at football this year. So, and the beauty of this is they could lose a game still on that schedule and make the playoff. So, we don't have to get into the debate on whether or not the 4-team or the 12-team is better. I've been very passionate about how much I enjoyed the 4-team field. But now when you're dealing with mulligans, with teams that should make their conference championship game, they could lose one of those regular season games, play in the conference championship game, win the conference, and still get the first round bye. Like they have a lot of room to have the Miami trip up and still get where I think they can go.
Yeah, they got some real estate here to work with. I'm so glad you said that about the 4-team playoff. Again, we're not going to jump into it, but you and I, hey, we're in lockstep on the 4-team playoff.
Okay. Yeah, because this is going to be a 3-hour episode if you want.
Exactly. We can have you on. We can roll into tomorrow, brother. We're wide open.
Yeah. I got nowhere to go. I've got nothing going on in my life.
You and me both. Not till Saturday, at least. You and me both.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of flip the script there. I want to stay in the ACC, at least for my take on this. Things that maybe I don't trust from week one of the college football season.
Okay.
Clemson was kind of like a talking point for a lot of people because they lost to Georgia by 31 points. And I'm like, 1, it's Georgia. 2, it's week 1. 3, they were double-digit underdogs to begin with. Like, I'm not so sure that Clemson, what we saw in that first half, isn't maybe something to look at. I still think Miami's the best team in the ACC. Are you with me on Clemson not selling the stock just yet? I don't think it mattered who they had in the portal, or is there something else that you think is maybe a little bit more of a fool's gold from week 1?
Well, one thing you have to know about me, JD, is that I love the stock market. I think it's amazing. It's like what I look at when I'm not looking at sports stuff. And I think the stock analogy is so overused, but I think it's really, really good because when you bought the Clemson stock, where did you buy it at? Did you buy it at perennial national championship contender? Or did you buy it after last season when things didn't go very well? Like, in terms of selling or buying the stock, I think it depends on how you view this program. So for me, I think Clemson is more than capable of going out and winning 10 games this year and maybe even potentially finishing in the 12-team field. But the problem for me is that my Clemson stock was purchased when they were a top 2 or maybe the top program in college football, and what we've seen is a decline from that. Now, Clemson can go win 10 games while simultaneously not scaring a single legitimate national championship contender. And that's not what Clemson should be or what their fans want from that program. So, do you want them to be the old version of Penn State, or do you want them to compete for national championships? Now, the way that Florida State has fallen is pretty drastic. Being 0-2 in your own conference after week 1 is crazy. But, even if Clemson, you take that first half and go, well, there's a lot of stuff to work with there. They're a tough team. They've got dudes. They can be really good. I do fear that we're losing the plot a little bit because the plot is that that Clemson is no longer elite, or is no longer the elite of the elite. And I think that's where the pain is. I don't think the pain is that, they're going to go lose 5 or 6 games now. I don't think that's going to happen. The pain is that they're not going to be able to play on the same field and compete at a high level for 4 quarters with Georgia anymore, when 4 years ago they were Georgia.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the scary part, too, is if you're Clemson and you do find yourself in that ACC title game, you're up against a portal-heavy outfit in Miami and a non-portal outfit in Clemson. And if you see Miami surpass them in that space, and it kind of looks that way right now on paper, it just further turns up the volume around, well, hey, if you use if Clemson had a Cam Ward, would that change the game? Again, we're getting too hypothetical there, but I'm right there with you. Clemson,
I legitimately think that Clemson could win the ACC this year. I don't think it's out of the question to be like Clemson can win the ACC. We watched them get their butts kicked by a juggernaut.
Yes. It wasn't the data point we need.
So take whatever you want, but what we do know is that Clemson does not match up with juggernauts. We don't know whether Miami's a juggernaut or not, but the statement Clemson does not match up with juggernauts is literal proof of the slippage in the program stature from 3 or 4 years ago, directly because of their stubbornness to engage in building a roster the way that you need to compete at this level in this game now.
And my question, too, is I know the portal is one thing, and a little bit of me is I think I said blue blood there. I meant tier 1. Clemson, they're probably not a tier 1 program in some sense because they're not recruiting at the clip that Georgia is. My question is, why do you need to go to the portal so consistently? Because we're having questions around what you have on the perimeter, what you have, on the defensive side of the football at times, what you have at quarterback at times. And so, I think what we also need to ask about Clemson is hey, why are we missing so much on the recruiting trail to where we have to go to the portal? We're asking you to go to the portal and just, be able to play with the Georgias and things like that. So, whole other discussion. Ari, I want to get your thoughts on this, though, too. When it comes to week 1 and what you saw, is Clemson the talking point for you when it comes to maybe don't sell your stock just yet, or maybe that's too overreactionary? What do you think is maybe something people are talking about right now that you're not buying just yet? Maybe that's more real than people are talking about right now.
Well, I think that a lot of people are talking about how Oregon might stink this year.
Yeah.
And that I ranked them in my On3 top 10 that I'll be doing on Saturday night every week, I believe at number 5. And people are like, what are you doing? And it's guys, it's college football. Teams play bad games. I am as shocked as you are that they played a 4-quarter game with Idaho. Do I think that Oregon stinks now? No, I don't. I don't. And if they do, we'll figure it out soon enough. The thing that has irked me, just in somebody who has just started doing rankings in the last year, because at my previous jobs, I was never asked to. I voted in the AP poll years ago, but to publish a poll is that when we are publishing polls, we're doing it to project the future. We're not doing it to overreact to what we saw in week one. We know this is a fickle game, and we know that teams have bad weeks, but they have earned my respect in the way that they have built out their roster, and I'm very certain that they're going to be a very good football team. So if you go watch a game, much like the same with the Michigan-Fresno State result, I know that that was a one-possession game in the fourth quarter. If you can't overreact to the big blowouts that are 73-0 or whatever, and you can't say Oregon's a juggernaut, I don't think that you can overreact in the negative either when a team just is sleepwalking through the first week. Now, I think it's scary when they sleepwalk, and that might be a symptom of a problem that resurfaces at some point in the season. But I don't think that the bad game that Oregon played is an indication that Oregon is a bad football team this year. I think it was a bad game, and I'm fully expecting them to rebound and be a tough out in the Big Ten this year.
I think that makes the Boise State game a little bit more intriguing. I know you're big on keeping track of what's going on in Vegas. Boise State is now plus 19.5. I'm tempted to take Oregon with that number, honestly, because of what happened against Idaho, what you just mentioned.
What did it open at?
I think it was something at 18.5 is what I saw. That was the lowest I saw it at, but it might have been lower than that.
Yeah, the thing that I'll say, JD, as somebody who's been around the block a little bit when it comes to this, is that when the line moves, it's always tempting, but you want to pay attention to the crucial numbers. Like if it gets over 20 or 21, that's a really, really big change, because the difference between 18 and 19 a lot of times isn't nearly as important as the difference between 19 and 21 and a half, because then you start crossing over into multiple score games that you didn't have to before. So just pay attention to that. I don't know. I mean, listen, I think that Boise's really good. And they're the number one team in most people's thoughts of who's the G5 representative going to be this year in the playoffs. So I can't stand that the game is on Peacock, and a lot of people are going to miss it. I think that, I would pay any amount of money just to watch that one game. It's the new pay-per-view. But I do think that, like, if Boise State is in a one-possession game in the middle of the third quarter or the fourth quarter, I think we can start extrapolating a little bit more about maybe all these pieces with Oregon just aren't working yet. But I'm just not there yet. I'm not there from a pure talent standpoint on the roster to say Oregon can't beat anybody in the country yet.
Well, let's talk about the game that you're going to this week, because you and Andy are headed to Ann Arbor, taking the show on the road, and going to be at Texas, Michigan. Who does this one mean more to? Because a part of me is like, well, hey, Michigan could drop this one, beat Oregon, and get a win over Oregon or Ohio State, one of the two, go 10-2, and they're in the playoff. Texas, they're looking down the barrel of an SEC schedule. If they drop this one, I'm like, hey, I don't know, what the rest of your college football playoff aspirations look like. Maybe I'm blowing that out of proportion a little bit. Do you have a feel as to who this game means more to?
I think that this game probably has to mean more to Texas. I don't know if this is going to rub people the wrong way, and I'm sorry, but like Michigan's playing with house money this year. Yeah. I mean, they won the national championship a year ago. They lost their coach, who's now a Michigan legend. They lost half of their roster. I don't know that Michigan fans are returning into this year and demanding a team go 11-1 and beat Ohio State again and make the playoff and go on a run. I think Texas, got over the hump last year and they made the playoff, but they are on a route to trying to assert themselves as an SEC power that's going to be consistent, because it's one thing to have a really, really good year. Teams have good years all the time. It's another thing to be a consistent program with staying power. And Texas has only done the first thing, breakthrough season in the Big 12. But now they're in a new conference. They're facing the defending national champions on the road. They have a very explosive offense with one of the deepest receiver cores in the country. And they're facing a defense that might have three of the first-round picks on the defensive side of the ball all playing on the same defense. So I'm not saying that Michigan's going to stink or that they can't win this game or that fans aren't going to be upset if they lose. But in a game where playoff potential isn't going to be won or lost on either side. I think that when you look at the road ahead for Texas and playing in the SEC, they probably have a tougher go of it, especially considering the fact I think that they're playing Oklahoma and Georgia in back-to-back weeks. So Michigan is just still riding high on a national championship win, and I think that Texas probably has to be more hungry in terms of proving that last year wasn't a flash in the pan and they're going to revert back to being the old Texas.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I love the fact, too, that Michigan, they get Oregon and Ohio State, obviously, later on in the year where they have a chance to kind of break in the quarterback a little more, kind of find their identity a little bit more. Like USC, you probably view a little bit more differently than you did before Sunday night's action against LSU. But all that's to say, too, I mean, Michigan, like you said, house money, 128th returning production in all of college football. Like they're going to be okay. They're going to find their sea legs. Ari, before we let you go, man, Nebraska, Colorado, prime time. You got a take in that one for us?
Oh, man. So here's my take. And I've just got sucked up into the Deion hater-verse yesterday, and I just like, I don't know if I can do it again.
We've been there. We've been there.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, we've gotten to a point with Colorado where you either think that Deion Sanders is the greatest thing that's ever happened to the history of college football, or you hate the guy's guts, and you can't have a nuanced discussion about whether or not you think he's coming up short or living up to what I thought the expectations were. But that said, there's no question that Colorado has made huge strides from what the program was before he arrived to the program that it is now. I think getting, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter on a team like that, they never would have played there in any previous iteration of Colorado football. Like the gains that Colorado has made are without question. But the thing that is interesting about this game more than anything is that Nebraska, though not completely in the mediaverse the same way that Colorado is in a very similar situation right now where they have a coach who's recently hired and trying to rebuild the program. And I think on both sides, you have teams that are trying to prove that they are not the same team that they were last year or, in Nebraska's case, the 3 or 4 years before that. So, I don't know who's going to win. I thought Nebraska was going to win last year. I think they're going to win this year, but I do know that Colorado is got who I think might be the best player in college football, and Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders is a lot better than I've given him credit for in the past. I think they're going to get theirs, but I do think that the result of this game, JD, is going to help us understand the paths of both of these programs a little bit more, because I don't think that anything that we saw from Colorado last week makes them a different team than what we saw last year. They got off to a fast start last year, and they ended up losing a bunch of games and were not competitive. Their conference is easier this year, but also more competitive top to bottom probably. And is Colorado better than they were last year, and is Nebraska better than they were last year, and are both headed in the direction that their fans are hoping for? I think we're going to get a lot of answers in this game in regards to both programs.
Yeah, we're in lockstep there. Like, as much as I think Nebraska's probably the more physical outfit up front, and they were last year, they went for like 200 yards in that game and still got whooped. I don't know how you slow down like Shedeur Sanders and Jimmy Horn and Travis Hunter. Like that to me just gives this a very like arm wrestle feel. Like whoever gets leverage first, whoever gets like the first lean on this thing, probably going to be hard to catch up with if it's Colorado. Probably going to be hard to get the ball back from Nebraska if they got a 10-point lead and can just run the ball against you. I think what you said was interesting though about Deion, because we've said that on this show too. Like the tough part about discussing Colorado is as soon as they beat TCU, which was a massive win, I think a lot of people did not see that coming. Deion Sanders goes to the podium and says, "Do you believe now?" And it's like, dude, it was one game. I don't know. Like, I don't believe most things after one game. I'm telling you right, I don't believe that Clemson's that bad after losing to Georgia, and I'm not sure about a lot of teams in college football after. Like, I don't know what I believe after one game. But it sort of drew this line in the sand where you're forced to pick a side of you think Colorado's going to win the national championship, or you think that Colorado is doesn't belong in D1 college football. It's like, hey, maybe I need to see a little. I'm not against anybody here. I'm trying to make an accurate assessment of everybody, and I can't do that off of one game or one season. So,
but what does "do you believe" even mean, JD? What does it mean? Do I believe what? Like, do I believe that they're better than they were? Sure, absolutely, they are definitely better than they were. But do you believe in the long-term viability of the program as a team that's going to compete at a high level and win 10 or 11 games? I don't know that I do. And it's not because I don't think Deion Sanders can do it. I think he can. What disappoints me about Deion Sanders more than anything is that his number one qualification for being the head coach of Colorado is his stardom, and he does not weaponize that stardom in amassing high school talent. And frankly speaking, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years down the line, but there's really not a lot in Deion Sanders' behavior that institutes a lot of faith that he's going to be the head coach there in 2 years. I think that he's trying to flip this quickly, and I really do believe if he went all in from a recruiting standpoint, that Colorado could be a team that I would be not only high on, but rooting for. I'm just disappointed by how he's gone about assembling his roster. If you think they're much better than they were, could you imagine how good they could be? If he actually went all in on 25, 30 recruits, visited their high schools, called their parents every day, did all the things that you need to do in order to amass a program that has a foundation to build off of in the portal. That's my only criticism of the guy. I think it's rational.
Oh, I think it's very. That's the show that we could do where we would go for a little bit here, because I 100% agree. You're dealing Deion Sanders could be a massive weapon should he go in person.
Go beat Deion. 100%. Go beat Deion in every high school hallway in America. Nobody 100%. Treats you differently. If Kirby Smart can do it, you can do it. Okay.
I'm with you, Arwell. All right, I appreciate your time, man. Have an absolute blast at Michigan, Texas. I think I asked you for 10, 15 minutes. I think we surpassed that twofold. So thank you for all your time, man. So fired up here at On 3, and excited to do this again soon, man.
Yeah, anytime, JD. And if we ever go overtime, it's my fault. I always know that.
No,
so
not at all.
Appreciate you.
No such thing as overtime. Again, Ari Wasserman, so fired up. Talk about a massive get. Talk about a massive get for us here at On 3, man. Again, Andy and Ari, every single weekday morning on the On 3 YouTube channel. Just a good time. Just a good time. A guy that loves college football the way that we love college football. So that's definitely worth your time in the morning. I would encourage you to listen on podcasts. Would encourage you to watch on YouTube. Another reason to be subscribed to the On 3 YouTube channel. All right, let's jump into this now. Every single Thursday during the college football season, the last segment of our Thursday show, we give you our final thoughts, our final takes, kind of the last word, if you will, on what we believe is going to happen in week 2 of the college football season. Here's my first take for you. I think that Nico Iamaleava, we walk out of that game against NC State, we're like, yeah, he's the real deal. He's the real deal. And you say, well, it's only game 2. It's NC State. We'll see what Bama is. We'll see what Georgia. All true. All true. I'm not saying you give him the Heisman Trophy, but I think you get further validation of okay, this dude's going to be real good. Tennessee's going to be very 2022-ish with him at quarterback. The reason why I feel that way in this game, is it a road game? Not exactly, but it is in Charlotte. It's a neutral site. It'll be a big spot for him, biggest spot of his career. There's a lot of validating filters, I think, in play here. Really good defense against NC State. Historically, I expect no different in this game. A defense that I think will apply pressure, force him to operate under some duress. We're going to see a little bit of metaphorical pressure for him, potentially literal pressure as well in terms of how they try to heat him up. You get some pressure on a quarterback, you find out who he is. I think in this game, Nico will spin the rock like he did against Chattanooga. I think he goes for north of 270, potentially 300 yards if we're just going to go that specific. I think that his wide receivers will win for him as well. I've given my take on how they're going to eat in the RPO game against NC State. In this game, in this week, we get further validation that Nico Iamaleava is, in fact, him at Tennessee. Before we get to this next take, want to make sure y'all know that the hard count is brought to y'all by our friends over at PrizePicks. Daily fantasy made easy. If you want to tail us on this show, we got lineups for you. We'll give you a lineup actually a little bit later in this segment. One of those projections that we have on here is involving Nico Iamaleava and his pass yards, so stay tuned. PrizePicks, the way that it works, you pick 2 or more player projections, pick the more or less on there, you're off to the races, squeezing the juice out of your college football Saturday. Use code HARDCOUNT at prizepicks.com. When you play $5 in lineups, does not matter if you win or lose. You just play a $5 lineup, get yourself $50 in promo funds using code HARDCOUNT. Again, we're going to give you a lineup here in just a second, but would encourage you to lock in. It's a great time, and we want y'all on board here. It's also just full transparency, a great way to support the show. They see people signing up with code HARDCOUNT. Vibes are good. They like us. We're rolling. The show's growing. All that. So we appreciate y'all for that. Now, Oregon. A lot of talk. They've kind of been a talking point for us since the Idaho game happened in terms of how much people have overreacted around them. It's pretty straightforward for me when it comes to Oregon. I think they just remind everyone that they're Oregon. like everything we said about them during the offseason with, well, they're going to have a great offense and their defense and their roster and the Big Ten, all that. We just get validation in this game, I think. I think they'll score in the 40s. They scored 24 last week against Idaho. I promise you, Dan Lanning, I said it during an earlier segment, I would have to believe he has been on top of everyone in that building saying, hey, we gotta ratchet it up a notch here. We got to have a sense of urgency about ourselves. I think they played dominant matchup football against Boise State. I think they stopped the run effectively. Ashton Jeanty is through 1 week of college football, the best back in college football, so that'll be a good test for them. Dan Lanning having ammunition to get his guys correct is massive. We'll see Oregon back to what we expect Oregon to be, and I think that offense is humming. Now, I think Texas against Michigan, I think they have a little bit more success through the air than some people are expecting right now. Because Will Johnson, I think for a lot of people, myself included, is probably the best cornerback in college football. You could have a discussion around Benjamin Morrison, have a discussion around Denzel Burke at their respective spots at Notre Dame and Ohio State. But I feel like for Texas, the quantity of weapons they have, from a Ryan Wingo to a Matthew Golden to Isaiah Bond, I saw enough matchups won by Fresno State over Michigan last week to where I'm like, I think Texas could take advantage of a couple of those situations. I think Quinn Ewers could maybe put the ball where it needs to go if they're able to win in man coverage. I think that Steve Sarkisian games it up much like he did against Alabama, where they're having pre-snap movement, and they're shifting at right before the snap and getting the defense discombobulated. I think Texas through the air will have a lot of success. Does Quinn Ewers throw for like 350 yards? I'm not so sure about that, but I do think you see a notable advantage for Texas on the perimeter against these Michigan defensive backs. So we got a PrizePicks play on that too in just a second here. Nebraska, I think they play clean football, which sounds sort of like, oh, that's great. Like, that's, usually what it takes to win a football game. But if you're a Nebraska fan, you're like, hallelujah. They were one of the worst teams in America last year when it came to turning the football over. They had a 6% interception rate. What that means, out of all the snaps that Nebraska took offensively, 6% of them was an interception. That's not even accounting for fumbles. And so with Dylan Raiola now playing quarterback, I think that when they play clean football and they have a guy at quarterback that can make the simple play, check it down, hit the intermediate pass game, when they overcommit to the run game, hit the deep pass game. If you're a Nebraska fan, you feel like, okay, like I said earlier, we're not crazy and we're not cursed. We had a take earlier from one of y'all that Nebraska wins this game definitively. I think it's a bit closer than that throughout this game. I think if you're Nebraska, you take a deep exhale after this game by winning a close game, and you lost 5 close games last year, you say, okay, we're not actually snake bitten. We're okay. This is a new leaf here at Nebraska under Matt Rule that we're turning, and the vibes are back high in Lincoln. Now, this is the last take I have for you, and this is kind of a fun one now. There's a game in the ACC this week that does not involve Clemson or Miami or Florida State. It might be the best game of the whole weekend. Just pure entertainment value. I will always call it the Carrier Dome, just from living in upstate New York. I know they changed the name. I'm calling it the Carrier Dome. Georgia Tech goes to Syracuse, a ranked Georgia Tech, mind you, favored by 2.5 points. I think this is going to be awesome. You got 2 transfer quarterbacks, which is just the epitome of modern college football. Haynes King and Kyle McCord. You got Brent Key and Fran Brown. This is going to be a fun one. Again, I would recommend tuning into this game as much as you can. I believe it's a noon kick. That might be one of the best games of the whole afternoon. 2 ACC sleepers. I'm just telling you, entertainment value will be through the roof. That'll be a good time. Lock in over there. For the record, give me Syracuse in that game. And Kyle McCord and company getting it done. So we love that. Okay. So I promised you a PrizePicks play. Here's what I like for this weekend. I think that Nico Iamaleava, like I said, just drops the mic and has a tremendous game against NC State. I think his wide receivers win for him. I think they're able to create matchups to where those wide receivers do end up having a chance to win for him. I think the RPO game is just, cutting up like hibachi for them. I think that his passing yard total, which is down a few yards from yesterday, so keep an eye on this. Right now, it's at 253.5 through the air for Nico Iamaleava. I like the more there. So we'll pair that with Quinn Ewers and his passing yards. I told you, I think Texas and the quantity of weapons. Will Johnson can't cover everybody. I think that his passing yard total is too low as well. We'll take the more on 246.5 pass yards for him against Michigan. So I like both those to make a PrizePicks play. We'll take the more on both. If you want to sprinkle in one more square, Caleb Williams right now, half a passing yard throughout the month of September, just a free square PrizePicks is throwing out there for you. Use code HARDCOUNT, $5 in lineups, $50 in promo funds. Let's lock in. Let's have a great time. Week 2 is here, baby. Let's get after it. Gotta love it, man. You gotta love it. But we appreciate all y'all tuned in live, man. Awesome week of shows. We are into college football season. One more word from our friends over at Game Time, and then we will get together and break this thing down. So the Hard Count is brought to y'all by our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the fast, easy, safe, efficient, affordable way to make sure you are buying the best tickets at the lowest prices, guaranteed. So I know a lot of y'all now, you're kind of hunting for tickets at the last minute. You're like on the fence. Maybe I'll go. Maybe I won't go. Maybe I'll find a way on Saturday morning. I'm just telling you now, use the Game Time app. You can know before you buy, which is a great feature now. You're not going to be sitting behind, some poll. If you find a ticket that's super cheap, you're like, wow, I wonder why. Because you're behind a poll, brother. Don't have that scenario sneak up on you, because with the Game Time app, you can see the view from your seat before you buy. And then if you buy a ticket in the same section and row for less on another platform, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's a great way to go about business. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time all college football season long. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code HARDCOUNT for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account. Redeem code HARDCOUNT, HARDCOUNT, for $20 off your first purchase, and we will have a tremendous college football season. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Hey, we're so glad to have y'all here, man. This is so cool. This is so cool. We actually have college football games happening right now. Golly, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. Fall is here. We're having ourselves a great year. We appreciate y'all making us a part of what you listen to on a weekly basis. Tell a friend. Send them the link to this podcast, link to this show. Tell them to subscribe. Tell them it's good for their health, good for their fanhood throughout this college football season. Subscribe on your way out, man. We love y'all. We appreciate y'all. For Nick Brick producing the show, for myself, JD Pickell, we are going to keep this party rolling. And we will see y'all